In the quiet, rolling hills of White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, the morning sun cast long shadows through the pines, and a young girl sat on the porch steps, counting everything in sight. That girl was Katherine Coleman, born in 1918, and from her earliest days, she possessed a fascination with numbers that went far beyond simple curiosity. She would count the dishes her mother washed, the steps to the schoolhouse, the stars that appeared in the dark country sky. Her father, a farmer and janitor who could barely write his own name, recognized something extraordinary in his youngest daughter. He moved the family 120 miles so that Katherine and her siblings could attend school beyond the 8th grade, a sacrifice that planted the seeds for a brilliant future. In the segregated South, where Black children were denied equal education, Katherine's parents nurtured her gift with unwavering belief, turning their home into a haven of encouragement amid a world of closed doors. Katherine's mind worked in ways that astonished adults. By the age of 4, she was already attending school, and she completed the 8th grade by 10. Numbers were not just symbols to her, they were a language she instinctively understood. She would later recall that she counted everything, the steps, the plates, the clouds, as naturally as breathing. Her teachers, many of whom were dedicated Black educators in a system starved for resources, recognized her prodigious talent and pushed her forward. In an era when few Black students, and even fewer Black girls, were encouraged in mathematics, Katherine found mentors who handed her advanced textbooks and challenged her with problems far beyond her grade level. She devoured every lesson, her mind a quiet engine of logic and precision, while outside the classroom walls, the harsh realities of Jim Crow Virginia remained ever present, a constant reminder of the limits placed on people who looked like her. When Katherine was 10, her family moved to Institute, West Virginia, where she could attend the high school on the campus of West Virginia State College, a historically Black institution. The campus was a world within a world, a place where Black intellect was cultivated and celebrated, even as segregation fenced it off from the broader society. Here, Katherine walked beneath towering oaks and brick buildings that hummed with the energy of young minds determined to rise. She excelled in every subject, but mathematics was her true north. By 14, she had graduated high school and enrolled in college, where she took every math course available. One of her professors, W. Schieffelin Clater, a pioneering Black mathematician who had earned his Ph.D. from the University of Pennsylvania, recognized her rare ability and created advanced classes just for her, including analytic geometry, a subject that would later become the foundation of her career. At 18, Katherine graduated summa cum laude with degrees in mathematics and French, a remarkable achievement for any young person, but especially for a Black woman in 1937. The world outside the college gates, however, offered few paths for someone with her talents. She became a schoolteacher, shaping young minds in rural Black schools, where she often taught all subjects in a single room. The work was honorable, but it could not contain the scope of her ability. She married James Goebel and started a family, and for more than a decade, she balanced domestic life with teaching, all the while feeling the quiet pull of higher mathematics. She was a mother, a wife, and a hidden genius, waiting in the wings of history. The limitations of the segregated South meant that her gift remained largely invisible to the institutions that would one day depend on it, but the foundation had been laid, a mind forged by family love, sharpened by dedicated teachers, and tempered by the quiet resilience of a woman who never stopped counting. In the stillness of those early years, Katherine's story was one of light and shadow. The light came from the warmth of a family that believed in her, the flicker of kerosene lamps as she studied late into the night, and the golden afternoons on the college campus where her intellect soared. The shadow was the ever-present barrier of segregation, a system that told her she could only go so far because of the color of her skin. Yet, in the quiet arithmetic of her daily life, she was already calculating a different trajectory, one that would eventually carry her beyond the Earth's atmosphere. She did not know it then, but every counted step, every solved equation, was preparing her for a role that would help send humans into space and redefine what was possible. In the summer of 1953, the air in Hampton, Virginia, was thick with humidity and the hum of progress. The Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory, a sprawling complex of brick buildings and wind tunnels, stood as a temple of American aviation research. It was here that the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, or NACA, the predecessor to NASA, was pushing the boundaries of flight. Katherine Johnson, now a 35-year-old mother of three, stepped onto this campus not as a visitor, but as a newly hired mathematician. She was part of a unique workforce, the human computers, women who performed complex calculations by hand. For Katherine, this was the moment her lifelong love of numbers found its purpose. The facility itself was a study in contrasts, gleaming new research wings alongside older, utilitarian structures, and everywhere the sound of slide rules clicking and drafting pencils scratching against paper. Katherine was assigned to the West Area Computing Unit, a segregated group of Black women mathematicians who worked in a separate building on the western edge of the campus. The West Area, with its modest brick exterior and simple interior, was a world apart from the main research divisions. Here, under the supervision of Dorothy Vaughan, a brilliant mathematician in her own right, the women performed calculations for engineers across Langley. The work was meticulous and demanding, often involving long sheets of data and mechanical calculators. Segregation dictated not only where they worked but where they ate, used the restroom, and even where they sat. Yet, within these confines, Katherine found a community of sharp minds and shared experience. She absorbed the work with characteristic intensity, her fingers flying over the calculator keys, her mind already reaching beyond the routine assignments. Just 2 weeks into her new job, Katherine's talent caught the attention of engineers in the Flight Research Division, and she was temporarily reassigned to help with a pressing project. The temporary assignment became permanent. She walked from the quiet West Area into the heart of Langley's most advanced aeronautical research, a world of wind tunnels, pressure gauges, and the urgent race to understand supersonic flight. The building she entered was filled with white men in crisp shirts and ties, surrounded by drafting tables and blackboards covered in equations. It was a space where she was often the only woman, and always the only Black person. The silence when she entered a room could be heavy, but Katherine did not let it deter her. She focused on the numbers, and the numbers did not care about her race or gender. Katherine's quiet assertiveness became her hallmark. In an era when women were expected to be silent support staff, she asked questions, lots of them. She wanted to understand the why behind the calculations, not just the how. She would later say that her curiosity was simply part of her nature, but it was also a deliberate act of claiming her space. When she was told that women did not attend the engineers' briefings, she asked if there was a law against it. There wasn't, and eventually, her persistence earned her a seat at the table. In those briefings, surrounded by the era's leading aeronautical minds, she absorbed the principles of flight mechanics and trajectory analysis. The daily rhythm of her work became a blend of solitary calculation and collaborative problem-solving, all set against the backdrop of a nation slowly awakening to the need for all its talent. By the late 1950s, as NACA transitioned into NASA and the focus shifted from airplanes to spacecraft, Katherine had become an indispensable part of the team. Her work on the equations of orbital mechanics was so trusted that engineers would often bring their problems directly to her desk. The physical environment of Langley was changing too: new computers, new buildings, and a new sense of urgency as the space race heated up. Yet, through all the changes, Katherine remained a steady, calm presence. She had broken through the most rigid barriers not with confrontation, but with competence and a quiet refusal to be invisible. The segregated West Area was eventually dissolved, but the legacy of its women lived on in every trajectory they plotted. Katherine's journey from a temporary computer in a segregated unit to a core member of the Flight Research Division was a testament to what can happen when talent is given even the smallest opening. The light of her mind, so carefully nurtured in the hills of West Virginia, was now shining on the frontiers of space. The early morning light streamed through the Venetian blinds of Building 1244 at NASA's Langley Research Center, casting long, slanted shadows across rows of heavy metal desks. The year was 1961, and the air hummed with a quiet, electric tension. Katherine Johnson sat at her workspace, a neat stack of paper and a sharp pencil before her. She was not a secretary or a clerk, but a mathematician, an aerospace technologist whose mind could trace the invisible arcs of spacecraft through the heavens. Outside, the world was caught in the grip of the Cold War, a race not just of arms, but of ambition. The Soviet Union had already sent Yuri Gagarin into orbit, and now the United States was preparing to launch its first astronaut, Alan Shepard, on a suborbital flight. The mission was called Freedom 7, and its success rested not only on the bravery of the man in the capsule, but on the precision of the numbers that would guide him. The task before Katherine was deceptively simple to describe yet immensely complex to execute: trajectory analysis. She had to calculate the path of the Freedom 7 capsule from the moment it lifted off the launch pad at Cape Canaveral to the moment it splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean. This involved a cascade of interconnected problems. She needed to determine the exact speed and angle at which the Redstone rocket would burn its fuel, the point of engine cutoff, the separation of the capsule, and the subsequent ballistic arc that would carry Shepard to an altitude of over 100 miles. Then came the critical re-entry phase, the angle at which the capsule would hit the atmosphere, the deceleration forces, and the deployment of the parachutes. Each calculation was a link in a chain. A single error could mean the capsule burning up, skipping off the atmosphere into space, or plunging into the ocean with fatal force. Katherine worked with a calm, focused intensity. She used a mechanical pencil, a slide rule, and her profound understanding of celestial mechanics. The equations were not abstract to her. She could visualize the trajectory, the capsule a tiny point moving along a graceful, parabolic curve against the deep blue of the Earth. She drew upon the foundational work of the Flight Research Division, but the specific numbers for Shepard's flight were hers to generate. She accounted for the Earth's rotation, its slightly oblate shape, and the gravitational variations that could nudge a spacecraft off course. The hum of the room, the murmur of other engineers, the occasional ring of a telephone, all faded into a quiet backdrop. For Katherine, the real world existed in the columns of figures she meticulously filled on her data sheets, each digit a small, solid fact in a sea of variables. One of the most challenging aspects was the re-entry calculation. The capsule had to enter the atmosphere at a precise angle, too steep, and the G-forces would crush the astronaut, and the heat shield would fail, too shallow, and it would bounce back into space like a stone skipping on a pond. Katherine computed the exact position for the retro-rockets to fire, the timing of their burn, and the resulting descent path. She worked backwards from the desired splashdown point in the Atlantic, near the Bahamas, through the atmospheric drag and the capsule's ballistic coefficient, all the way back to the moment of launch. Her reports, co-authored with engineer Ted Skopinski, were among the first from the Flight Research Division to bear a woman's name. They laid out the equations and the procedures with such clarity and rigor that they became a standard reference for the Mercury program. As the launch date of May 5, 1961, approached, the pressure intensified. The astronauts themselves, including Alan Shepard, would visit Langley to understand the work being done. They were test pilots, accustomed to having control, but in the cramped Mercury capsule, they were largely passengers, their lives dependent on the mathematics done on the ground. Katherine's quiet confidence and the obvious depth of her knowledge began to build a bridge of trust. She was not just a computer who produced numbers. She could explain the why behind them, the physics that governed the flight. In a profession dominated by white men, this African-American woman from West Virginia was becoming an indispensable part of the team, her voice a calm, authoritative presence in technical discussions. The day of the launch, Katherine watched along with the rest of the nation. The Redstone rocket ignited, lifting Shepard on a pillar of fire. For 15 minutes, he soared to the edge of space, experienced weightlessness, and then began his descent. The calculations held. The capsule splashed down exactly where predicted, and Shepard was recovered safely. It was a triumph not just of engineering, but of human courage and intellectual rigor. For Katherine Johnson, the success of Freedom 7 was a quiet vindication. Her numbers had charted a safe path through the perilous ocean of the sky. She had helped send the first American into space, and in doing so, had laid the foundation for even greater journeys to come. The trust she earned in that small, sunlit room would soon be called upon for an even more audacious mission, one that would require her to check the work of a machine and, in the process, help an astronaut circle the Earth. The winter of 1962 had settled over Hampton, Virginia, but inside the Langley Research Center, the atmosphere was charged with a different kind of energy. The Mercury program was accelerating, and the goal was no longer a simple up-and-down flight. The next mission, Friendship 7, would attempt to put an American astronaut into orbit around the Earth. The astronaut chosen for this monumental task was John Glenn, a calm, deliberate Marine Corps pilot. The capsule was more complex, the flight longer, and the calculations exponentially more difficult. But there was a new element in the equation, an electronic computer. For the first time, an IBM 7090, a room-sized machine of spinning tapes and glowing vacuum tubes, would compute the trajectory. It was faster than any human, but it was also new, and its reliability was not yet fully trusted by the man whose life depended on its output. Katherine Johnson, now a well-respected figure in the Flight Research Division, had been deeply involved in the orbital mission planning. She had calculated the launch window, the precise moment when the Earth's rotation would align with the desired orbital plane. She had worked on the tracking network equations, ensuring that ground stations around the globe could follow the capsule. Her days were spent in a rhythm of analysis and verification, her desk a landscape of trajectory plots and data sheets. The building around her was a mix of old and new, the timeless slide rules and the humming promise of the digital age. The computer's calculations, printed on long reams of paper, were a new kind of artifact, and they required a new kind of scrutiny. As the launch date of February 20th, 1962, approached, John Glenn made a request that would become legend. He was at Cape Canaveral, going through final preparations, when he told the mission controllers, "Get the girl to check the numbers." He meant Katherine Johnson. He knew her work from the Freedom 7 mission and the subsequent orbital planning. He trusted her mind. He wanted her, by hand, with her pencil and her slide rule, to verify the trajectory numbers that the IBM computer had produced. If she said the numbers were good, he would fly. It was a remarkable moment of trust, a testament to her reputation, and a stark illustration of the human element in the technological drama of spaceflight. The task was enormous. The computer had churned through thousands of calculations, generating a trajectory that would guide Glenn through 3 orbits, from his launch over the Atlantic, across the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, and back to a splashdown near the Bahamas. Katherine had to replicate this work, but with the deliberate, step-by-step method of manual computation. She started with the basic equations of orbital mechanics, the laws of Kepler and Newton. She factored in the Earth's gravitational field, the atmospheric drag at the capsule's low perigee, the rotation of the Earth beneath the flight path. She worked for a day and a half, her focus absolute, the world outside her office fading to a blur. Each number was checked and rechecked, each equation balanced. The stack of paper beside her grew, filled with her neat, precise handwriting. Finally, she finished. The numbers matched. The computer's trajectory was correct. She called the Mission Control Center and relayed the confirmation. It was a simple message, but it carried the weight of a life. On the morning of the launch, Glenn climbed into the Friendship 7 capsule atop an Atlas rocket. The world watched as the engines ignited, and he was propelled into the dawn sky. For almost 5 hours, he circled the Earth, witnessing multiple sunsets and sunrises, reporting on the view and the spacecraft's performance. There was a moment of high drama when a sensor indicated the heat shield might be loose, but the trajectory held, and the retro-rocket pack was kept attached to help hold it in place. Katherine's numbers, the ones she had verified, guided him safely back through the atmosphere to a perfect splashdown. In the aftermath of the successful mission, the story of Katherine Johnson's verification spread. It was not just a tale of mathematical prowess, but of profound human trust. In an era of segregation and systemic barriers, an African-American woman's intellect had been the final arbiter for a national hero's safety. The moment cemented her reputation within NASA and, much later, in the public eye. She would go on to contribute to the Apollo missions and the Space Shuttle, but the image of her, pencil in hand, checking a machine's work at the request of John Glenn, became a defining symbol of the space age. It was a reminder that even in a world of advancing technology, the quiet, rigorous judgment of a dedicated human mind remains an irreplaceable asset. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of the Langley Research Center, casting long shadows across the desks cluttered with stacks of paper, slide rules, and celestial charts. Katherine Johnson sat quietly at her workspace, her fingers tracing the curves of a trajectory she had plotted by hand. The air was still, broken only by the soft hum of the building's ventilation and the distant clatter of a mechanical calculator. Outside, the Virginia summer was in full bloom, but inside these walls, her mind was already traveling 250,000 miles away to a destination no human had ever set foot on. The Apollo program was no longer a distant dream, it was a tangible goal, and every calculation she made brought it closer to reality. The weight of that responsibility did not rattle her. She had always found a peculiar calm in the precision of numbers, a quiet certainty that in a world of uncertainty, mathematics could be trusted. For the Apollo missions, Katherine's work focused on the critical task of determining the precise launch window, the narrow slice of time when the Earth and Moon were aligned in such a way that a spacecraft could reach its target with minimal fuel and maximum safety. This was not a simple matter of pointing a rocket at the Moon and firing its engines. The Earth rotated on its axis, the Moon orbited at over 2,000 miles per hour, and the spacecraft itself would be traveling through a constantly shifting gravitational landscape. Katherine calculated the trajectories that would allow the lunar module to descend to the surface, and just as importantly, ascend again to rendezvous with the command module. She worked closely with a team of engineers and fellow mathematicians, a collaborative effort where each person's expertise was a vital piece of the puzzle. In the bustling offices and quiet hallways, ideas were exchanged, and problems were solved over cups of coffee and chalkboard diagrams. Katherine, often the only Black woman in the room, contributed with a quiet confidence that had been forged over decades of overcoming doubt. One of her most vital contributions was the creation of backup navigation charts for the Apollo 11 mission. The onboard computers, revolutionary as they were still prone to the glitches and limitations of early technology. Astronauts needed a reliable fallback, a set of celestial reference points they could use to navigate if the electronics failed. Katherine mapped the positions of stars relative to the spacecraft's expected path, providing a manual method for the crew to confirm their location. It was painstaking work, requiring her to account for the spacecraft's velocity, the Moon's libration, and the subtle effects of solar radiation pressure. Each column of figures represented hours of concentration, and each page was a testament to her meticulous nature. She often thought of the astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, who would be trusting their lives to these numbers. In the quiet of the evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, she would review her work one final time, ensuring that every digit was correct. The success of Apollo 11 in July of 1969 was a global triumph, but for Katherine, it was a deeply personal moment of fulfillment. She watched the grainy black and white footage of Armstrong's first steps on a small television set at a gathering of colleagues, the room filled with a mixture of cheers and silent tears. She knew that within the intricate dance of physics and engineering that had made that moment possible, her own calculations had played a part. The lunar module's safe landing and the crew's return to Earth were the ultimate validation of her life's work. Yet, her contributions did not end with the moon landing. As the Apollo program continued, She worked on the calculations for Apollo 13, helping to chart the safe return of the astronauts after the in-flight explosion. Her ability to compute reliable trajectories under extreme pressure was once again a lifeline, though she would always emphasize that it was a team effort, a symphony of minds working together. In the decades that followed, Katherine Johnson's expertise was applied to new frontiers. She contributed to the development of the Space Shuttle program, calculating trajectories for its launch and re-entry, and worked on plans for a mission to Mars. Her mathematical fingerprints were also on the Earth Resources Satellite, a project that used space-based technology to monitor our planet's environment and resources. The hallways of Langley changed over the years. The slide rules gave way to more advanced computers, and the dress codes relaxed, but Katherine remained a constant, a quiet presence whose knowledge was sought by a new generation of engineers. She often mentored younger colleagues, sharing not just her technical skills, but the philosophy that had guided her: ask questions, be curious, and never assume that a door is closed until you have tried to open it. As she walked through the Langley campus in her later years, the buildings themselves seemed to tell a story. The old brick structures of the West area, where she had first started as a human computer in a segregated unit, now stood as historical landmarks. The contrast between that past and the modern, integrated research center was a reminder of how much had changed, and how much of that change had been driven by the quiet determination of people like her. The trees that lined the pathways had grown tall, and the shadows they cast were different now, softer perhaps, but the fundamental work continued. Katherine would often pause and look up at the sky, a habit from a lifetime of celestial navigation, and think about the countless trajectories she had plotted, each one a line connecting the earth to the heavens. Her story, like the numbers she loved, was a testament to the power of precision and perseverance. In a world that often tried to define her by her gender and the color of her skin, she had defined herself by the accuracy of her work. The moon landing was a giant leap for humanity, and Katherine Johnson had helped calculate the exact angle of that leap. Her legacy is not just in the hardware that flew to space, but in the quiet, enduring truth that talent, when given a chance, can overcome even the most entrenched barriers. The autumn of Katherine Johnson's life was painted in the soft, golden hues of a long-overdue harvest. For decades, her name had been known only to a select circle of engineers and astronauts, her monumental contributions hidden behind the anonymous title of computer. She had retired from NASA in 1986, content with a quiet life in Hampton, Virginia, where she spent her days reading, solving puzzles, and enjoying the company of her family. The world outside, however, was slowly beginning to turn its gaze toward the untold stories of the space race. In her small, sunlit living room, filled with the comforting aroma of old books and fresh coffee, Katherine would sometimes reflect on her journey. She rarely spoke of her own achievements, preferring to talk about the brilliance of her colleagues and the thrill of the missions. The shadows of the past, the segregated offices, the separate coffee pots, the constant need to prove her worth, had not embittered her. Instead, they had cultivated a deep well of grace and a quiet, unshakable dignity. The shift from hidden figure to national icon began slowly, like the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon. In 2015, at the age of 97, Katherine Johnson was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. The ceremony at the White House was a moment of profound symbolism. As she sat in her wheelchair, a bright blue ribbon holding the medal around her neck, the room erupted in applause. President Barack Obama spoke of her as a pioneer who had broken the barriers of race and gender, and whose calculations had helped open the heavens to humanity. For Katherine, the recognition was humbling, but also a reminder of all those who had come before and after her, the countless unseen contributors to the American space program. The medal was not just for her, it was for the community of Black women who had labored in the shadows, their brilliance illuminating a path to the stars. A year later, the publication of Margot Lee Shetterly's book, Hidden Figures, and the subsequent film adaptation brought Katherine's story into the living rooms of millions. The movie, with its warm, Vibrant cinematography captured the essence of her experience: the cluttered, bustling offices of Langley, the sharp click of high heels on linoleum floors, the quiet intensity of a woman who refused to be confined by the narrow expectations of her time. The film's success was not merely a commercial triumph, it was a cultural awakening. Young girls, especially those of color, saw in Katherine Johnson a reflection of their own potential. They wrote her letters, drew her pictures, and sent her messages of gratitude. In her home, surrounded by these tokens of affection, Katherine would smile, her eyes still sharp and full of curiosity. The world had finally learned her name, and in doing so, it had uncovered a powerful lesson about the value of persistence. The broader lessons of Katherine's life are woven into the fabric of American history. She faced the systemic barriers of Jim Crow segregation, where her intellect was often dismissed because of her race and gender. Yet, she navigated these obstacles not with loud protests, but with a steadfast commitment to excellence. She asked questions, she demanded a seat at the table, and she let her work speak with an eloquence that could not be ignored. Her story is not just about mathematics, it is about the quiet courage required to assert one's humanity in a world that often denies it. The limitations she faced were real and oppressive, but they were not the defining feature of her legacy. What defines her is the trajectory she plotted, not just for spacecraft, but for generations of dreamers who would follow. Katherine's enduring impact on STEM diversity is perhaps her most living legacy. After the Hidden Figures phenomenon, NASA renamed a building in her honor, the Katherine G. Johnson Computational Research Facility, a state-of-the-art center where the next generation of scientists and engineers tackle the challenges of the future. Scholarships and programs in her name continue to support underrepresented students in science and mathematics. The ripple effect of her recognition has encouraged a broader conversation about the unsung heroes of innovation and the importance of creating environments where all talent can flourish. In classrooms across the country, her poster hangs on walls, a symbol that genius knows no color or gender. The path she walked, though lined with shadows, is now illuminated for others to follow. As the years passed, Katherine Johnson became a beloved figure, her image synonymous with grace under pressure. She lived to see her 101st birthday, a century of change that she had both witnessed and shaped. In her final years, she enjoyed the simple pleasures of a life well lived, the warmth of the sun on her face, the laughter of her grandchildren, the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. The world she left behind in 2020 was vastly different from the one she was born into, and her fingerprints were on that transformation. The moon, which she had helped reach, now hung in the night sky as a permanent reminder of what humanity can achieve when it looks beyond its divisions. Her legacy is a quiet, steady light. It reminds us that history is not only made by those who stand at the podium, but by those who sit at the desk, slide rule in hand, patiently working through the problem. Katherine Johnson's life teaches us that the most profound revolutions are often the silent ones, built on the foundation of hard work, intellectual rigor, and an unyielding belief in one's own worth. In the grand equation of human progress, her contributions are a constant, a fixed point that will guide us for generations to come.